Despite spontaneous protests erupting across the country, Brett Kavanaugh has been confirmed to the Supreme Court. This comes after numerous allegations of sexual assault and misconduct. What does this say about the state of so-called democracy in the U.S.? Is Kavanaugh really an outlier in the Supreme Court? And what can the people do to hold both the Supreme Court and Congress accountable? Joining us to talk about this and so much more is Jackie Luqman, the co-host of Luqman Nation, which covers politics and social issues from a Black American and Pan-Africanist perspective. You can hear Luqman Nation on YouTube and Facebook Thursday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern. Thank you, Jackie, for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
In some ways, I'm in shock, and in some ways, I'm very much not, because I don't know. To me, it feels like we saw a lot of our characters kind of exposed, and a lot of bodies in terms of like the congressional bodies exposed for what they really are. I don't know how you feel about all this nonsense.
Yeah, I mean, I know that when we talked about this a few weeks ago on our show, and we went on a couple of other shows, we being my husband and I, as Luqman Nation, we said then that Kavanaugh is more than likely going to be confirmed, and everybody thought, oh my God, this was right when the Ford allegations came out. And, people thought, oh, no, this isn't they're not going to let this happen. They're not going to confirm this man. This is a showstopper. And I feel like people thought that because they really did not know who Brett Kavanaugh is. And they didn't understand that Brett Kavanaugh and the Trump administration, not necessarily Donald Trump, but the Trump administration, specifically with someone like Mike Pence waiting in the wings to take control of the presidency, are exactly the kind of people that the GOP has been working toward getting into power for decades. So it didn't matter what came out about Brett Kavanaugh. I mean, literally, I really believe that if he were accused of murder, they would have found a way to confirm him anyway, because Brett Kavanaugh's ideology, as you see through his judicial record, is exactly in lockstep, in line with the culture wars that the GOP has been waging for the past 50 years. They just needed somebody on the Supreme Court to legitimize their stances in these culture wars, and that's Brett Kavanaugh's role.
Yeah, I think there's so much to that, and I think that the fact that this person is sort of the merger of the personality and the culture with the ideology in such a perfect way, not in a good way, but in really Brett Kavanaugh in many ways, I think, is the Republican ideology embodied in a single person. And of course, you look at his actual so-called qualifications. He was largely kind of made during the Bush administration, as just sort of a product of the same thing. We're just going to shove through kind of the elites in many ways, correct?
Yeah. And I think the thing that made me kind of angry and disappointed at the Democrats, I mean, not that I'm not always angry and disappointed at the Democrats, because I am, but particularly in this case, they had so much ammunition to use against this man to keep him from being confirmed, specifically coming out of the Bush administration, and they just didn't. They seriously just didn't make a big deal about his involvement in the Manuel Miranda email scandal. That was a huge deal back in, I think, 2000 during the Bush administration. I can't remember the exact year, but basically the Senate, the Democratic Senate email server was hacked. I mean, it was literally hacked by an operative of the GOP. And that person used those stolen emails from the server of the Democratic Party in the Senate and gave the emails to the Bush administration officials. Kavanaugh was one of those people because he was the lead on judicial appointments for the Bush administration. So Manuel Miranda stole these emails, gave them to Kavanaugh and other members of the Bush administration, and the emails contained opposition research that the Democrats were doing on Bush's appointees. And some of those people were truly, truly problematic. Kavanaugh claimed that he never saw these emails. He'd heard about the scandal, but he didn't really know much about it until it was mentioned in the confirmation hearings. Well, and he said he never actually received the emails, but now emails were actually produced that prove all of that wrong during this confirmation hearing. Now, remember, he had to go through confirmation hearings in order to be confirmed for the U.S. District Court or on the Court of Appeals as a federal judge. He lied about this issue then. And the Democrats did not use any of this information that they finally had concrete documents in their hand, proof of, to stop him from being confirmed now. Now, they may not have stopped him from being confirmed, but the fact that they didn't even use this information the way they should have, this should have been a part of this public campaign to discredit Kavanaugh as a liar, that you don't want to appoint this kind of person to the Supreme Court. But the Democrats didn't do it.
To me, the way the Democratic Party has handled this has been really nothing short of disgusting. We saw this, if we go back to, for instance, the fact that they completely capitulated on DACA, for instance, after they said they were essentially going to protect DACA, and then they used it as a bargaining chip and bargained it away and got nothing for it. So they've already at this point sold out immigrants, and of course the issue of sexual violence against immigrants in so many of these detention camps. That's a kind of intersection within itself. But now we see them once again. From my understanding, there were multiple ways they could have shut down Kavanaugh, even as a minority, because essentially the Republicans did that during the Obama administration. They did not have a minority in Congress, and yet they were able to prevent an Obama appointee. You would think if the Democratic Party had a legitimate concern about the about the safety of women, and about not just the kind of personal safety of women that someone like Kavanaugh jeopardizes, but then the kind of systemic safety of women that someone like Kavanaugh can screw up on the Supreme Court. If they were genuinely concerned about that, it seems like they would have either denied a quorum to the judicial hearings or otherwise stalled the vote. I understand there are two processes that they could have taken to ensure that he was not nominated to the Supreme Court, and it seems almost like they would have rather. It seems almost like they made a conscious choice to grandstand instead, to make speeches and then to use this as a really, really cynical ploy to essentially say, well, this is why we need to vote in more Democrats, in November in the midterms.
Exactly. This for a lot of these Democrats like Cory Booker and Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, who will forever get the side eye from me for two things because of his behavior, his role in the Anita Hill hearings during Clarence Thomas's confirmation hearings, because we already have a sexual predator on the Supreme Court. And because of his role in the 1994 crime bill. So, but these are people, Biden, Harris, Booker, who are, and probably Elizabeth Warren, but to a lesser extent, they're jockeying for position for the next election. So they're building up their resume to say, see, you can point back to when I was vocally opposed to Brett Kavanaugh being confirmed, and this is what I said, when really all they all had to do was just not show up in order to stop this. All they had to do was just not show up for that vote, and the vote would have been invalid because there would not have been a quorum. So, and these are not people who don't know the rules. You're right. They just would rather grandstand because the Democrats are seeing this as a boost to their chances in 2020.
But
they're not. They're not. They don't really care that Brett Kavanaugh is a horrible judge. Already was a horrible judge, and is clearly a dubious person who is now sitting on the Supreme Court.
But yeah, and I feel like if they were concerned about winning, if it was only the winning part of it, they would have absolutely really gained so much credibility if they had, if they had actually stopped him, if they had actually made a principled stand, because I know, Cory Booker is kind of notorious as it is for taking these, kind of symbolic stands for things that are not really stands. I know that he had a moment, I believe, where he said something that he called it his Spartacus moment or something to that effect. I forget the exact thing, but essentially was releasing, trying to stand up for the release of some documents from the George Bush Presidential Library or something a couple months back when.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, and that was sort of his thing. It was like, it wasn't really a victory. He knew the documents were going to be coming out, but he tried to make it a publicity stunt. Like, that's a thing he's been doing for a very long time. And here, where it would have actually counted, where he had a chance to stand up and do something that would have been incredibly popular, given that Kavanaugh's approval rating at this point is in the 30-some%. He just didn't. None of them did. And in fact, of course, Joe Manchin, Democrat from West Virginia, sided with Kavanaugh, cast as much of a deciding vote as Susan Collins. And a vote is a vote. We had that the Democrat actually side with the Republican. So, what even is the point, I feel like, of the Democratic Party if they can't be held accountable, if they're going to cast symbolic votes they know are going to fail rather than take real action, and there's no way to hold these people accountable. And given that, with the fact that the DNC has also or had essentially given a green light for Democrats to vote for Kavanaugh, saying we are going to continue to support you. I believe that came from Tom Perez. Right. Like, what? Yeah, it just the whole thing just seems like a mess to me.
Yeah, I think this Kavanaugh confirmation should be, if people weren't already convinced, but it should be a pretty clear indication that even the so-called well-meaning Democrats, even the Democrats who somehow put on the mantle of progressives, the ones who are already in their offices and have been for a while, they are out of touch with their constituents. These are people who don't, they literally don't live like us. So they have no idea what is really important to us. Brett Kavanaugh's rulings on the Fourth Amendment have had direct negative consequences, direct negative impacts on how the police interact with disproportionately poor communities and communities of color. If the Democrats could not look at this man's record on that one issue alone and make that a clarion call for why he shouldn't be confirmed as a Supreme Court justice from the very beginning, from when he was initially announced as the nominee, then that just lets me know that the Democrats really don't care enough about the people they supposedly represent to even do the research. And this is easy stuff. This is easy stuff that, you and I and every other person with a computer and an internet can look up and find in 2.5 minutes. And one of the most powerful and wealthy political parties in the world probably wouldn't do this, just didn't do it.
Yeah.
And they expect us to vote for them in November in 2020. How?
I'd like to turn to actually talking about what really the Supreme Court is, because I feel like the kind of fire over Kavanaugh, the justified anger that people feel over Kavanaugh should also be an anger toward the fact that essentially the highest legal body in the land are 9 unappointed people who serve these life terms, who are essentially they're all political appointments in so many ways. There's not really a neutral judicial system here. A lot of liberal-minded people still have this idea that the Supreme Court is what it was during Brown versus Board, that it's this progressive institution, and that Kavanaugh has quote unquote tainted it. Even though, again, we already have Clarence Thomas there. There's a lot of evidence to support that Clarence Thomas is a sexual predator. Yeah, if you look, I feel like it's built into the very structure of the Supreme Court is this reactionary institution, not only in the type of people that are appointed to the Supreme Court, that are often from the very beginning, they were the American royalty. They were the richest people in the country. Many of the original Supreme Court justices were slave owners. And so it's like you have that personal aspect, but then it has actually existed, I feel like, in many ways to prevent democracy in so many ways. I'll turn over to you in just a second, but I want to read very quickly a quote about the Supreme Court. This comes from a banker, a New York banker in 1895, who said, quote, "I give you, gentlemen, the Supreme Court of the United States, guardian of the dollar, defender of private property, enemy of spoliation, sheet anchor of the republic." And I feel like that the fact that I feel like that says so much about what the Supreme Court is, and the fact that it is inherently an anti-democratic institution. It's not designed to bring about progressive change. It's designed to prevent progressive change in so many ways.
Yeah, I mean, the Supreme Court is misunderstood as the final and highest arbiter of the rights of American citizens in this country, and it's really not. It wasn't designed to be that, and it has not proven to be that. The Supreme Court is basically, when you think about it, it is like the judicial monarchy in this country, right? It's when you think about what the Supreme Court justices do, the kind of position they have, they're appointed by a president, and they have that job for life. They can retire from that job anytime they want to. Nobody can fire them. And they can literally die on the court if they want to. So if that is not, and they make their decision, the decisions of the Supreme Court are the final say in the interpretation of constitutional law, and in certain limited cases like disputes between states about certain things. If that's not a monarchy, I don't know what else that would be. And I think that's interesting that in a country where some people decided they didn't want to be ruled by a monarchy anymore, so they started a war, that we installed a monarchy over our judiciary, over our legislation, our legislative process. So that's very interesting. But the Supreme Court has always been the defender of white supremacy and the defender of a corporatocracy in this country, and it has used its opinions to further empower the police state to suppress the rights of citizens. Now, when we look at something like the 14th Amendment, right now. That amendment was originally adopted after the Civil War to protect the rights of the newly freed, formerly enslaved people. And it was supposed to be used for the protection of civil rights for all Americans, right? But and that's the case that Brown versus Board of Education hinged, or the amendment that Brown versus Board of Education hinged upon. But the 14th Amendment has been used less for the upholding of civil rights, especially for Black people in this country, than it has been used in the defense of corporate rights in this country before the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court has used the 14th Amendment and ruled in favor of corporations more than it has used the 14th Amendment to rule on behalf of upholding the rights of citizens and especially Black citizens, which is who the amendment was originally written for.
Yeah, that's really just not surprising at all. It's probably surprising to a lot of people. But, you know, if you look at the history of this, as we were just talking about, that the Supreme Court exists for this kind of a reason. Except for the times when kind of the balance of power had shifted globally, and you know, so for instance, during the during the Brown versus Board, that wasn't the Supreme Court was largely a very, very reactionary Supreme Court at that point, but simply the Brown versus Education. Or Brown versus Board of Education decision.
Say that 3 times fast.
Yeah, something like that. Like that decision reflected more of the strength of the people's struggle and the global balance of class and racial power having shifted at that point. And so I think that's what people need to keep watching, is understanding that like the Supreme Court, Congress, and the presidency are the three kind of quote unquote checks and balances on each other. That's what we hear in our civics classes and our social studies classes, whatnot. That there's this checks and balances system, but it seems to me that it's more an insulation system, because in the past, in the past 5 elections, 2 of the presidents, two of the elections have gone to the loser. 2 of the elections have gone to the person who got the second most amount of votes. That was, of course, Bush in 2000, right. Trump in 2016. So that electoral college system, again, another relic of the slaveocracy. That electoral college system was set up to favor slave states, rural slave states, as was the 3/5 compromise. So the very election of the president is anti-democratic in that many ways. The many gerrymandering problems we have in the country and the way that the House and Senate system is set up is anti-democratic to the point where asking anyone to hold their congressman accountable for any of these votes is near impossible already, just because of the fact that there's so much distance between us and our Congress people. But then, of course, there's the lobbying. There's the there's the actual structure of the Democratic Party itself, which is, as we've seen, has undermined its own progressive wing, actively sabotaged its own progressive wing. So all 3 of these these so-called checks and balances, I feel like they serve to insulate each other to the point where the presidency and the Congress can together legitimize this system of 9 essentially lifetime appointed monarchs in ways where it kind of vaguely resembles a democratic process. But when you look at any given gear in the machine, any cog in the machine, there's nothing democratic about any of these processes. So I guess my question would be, what do we, how do you feel about that? Is there anything you'd like to add or push back on? Is there, and then what do we do with this? I feel like so many people are feeling just helpless right now because they don't know how to actually interact with this system meaningfully.
Right. I mean, I absolutely agree that this entire system, there are no checks and balances in this system. This is a system, it's a closed and insulated system that is designed to like I said, not just the Supreme Court, but all of the branches of government are really designed to uphold white supremacy and to protect the growth of corporations in this country. And we have to be honest about that. I think one of the first things we need to do, which is an ongoing thing, Kwame Ture famously said that there is a need for continuous political education among the masses. We spend a lot of time trying to jockey for position with important people. And I mean, we in the progressive movement, we try to get all the important people to talk to us. But what we really need to do is to understand what we are dealing with in regard to this system and the history. And we need to educate the people around us in our communities. And we also need to, and I understand people are feeling helpless, and that's completely understandable because this is new. People didn't understand that they were dealing with this level of corruption in their government. They really believed that this is a system of checks and balances and it's a democracy and, this is we the people. And yeah, it's none of that. It's not that. So what we also have to do is to be unafraid to challenge these existing political parties. For those of us who are working on voting, absolutely put forward and elevate candidates for your local offices who represent values that are important to people. Don't just accept anybody who's a Democrat, somebody just because they're a Democrat and they're not a Trump supporter. Or absolutely, if voting is your thing, then vote. Yeah, because we're not going to get a whole lot of change as far as policy is concerned without politics. So we need to be involved in politics. At the same time, there also needs to be a continued push for people-focused revolution. And that means focusing on the needs and the issues that affect not only Black people, because nobody is free in this country unless we're free. And revolution has never been successful from the bottom up or from the top down or from the middle class down. Revolution has always worked in this around the world when it has been from the bottom up. So people need to get in their psyche that they're going to have to align with the people who've been fighting this battle since we've been here. And that's Black people and that's Native people. And then we need to change the way we educate our children. We need to supplement our public school education with the truth. And that means, no, we're not gonna get school boards to do that right now. But in the meantime, as we are supplementing that education in our communities and in our homes, we can work on changing the makeup of our school boards so that we can affect the curriculum and take on these publishing companies that produce this incorrect and false material. I mean, it's like macro solutions on a statewide and national level, but at the same time, it's micro solutions on an individual level. Support community organizations that are helping people in the community. Work with faith organizations that are doing the work of social and racial justice. There are some out there, and working together, we will eventually make the change that we need in this country. But I think the problem people are having is that change isn't going to happen overnight, and people want it to. And it's just not. This has been 400 years in the making. It's not going to be dismantled and changed in 2 election cycles.
Yeah, I think there's really so much to that. And I think, so many people for the first time, because of the unfoldings of 2016, now people are looking at things more closely. And now people who otherwise wouldn't have been engaged, even with the Democratic Party, are trying to find these outlets. And I think that those various points of experience, because, again, I don't see someone like, Beto O'Rourke, for instance, here really affecting that much in change. But I think people's experience in engaging with, local politics, regional politics, national politics, people's experience engaging not just with these political parties and seeing from the inside what these kind of machines look like, but also engaging with all these community groups on the ground in so many various ways, and will help people to really gain that experience to rethink to rethink what I think political engagement looks like beyond this sort of a civic engagement of, well, you have to vote. That's what we keep being told is like vote, 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 vote. And that's the only thing that's like the only point of political engagement that is kind of officially endorsed. And of course, the education part of it has to be a part of it. People think, why read theory? There's so much we need to do. We need to get involved in this action, this action, this action. But that understanding of the basic theory and the history behind this sort of thing, for instance, what is the state, is a question that so many people would have a tough time answering. It's all around us, but it's not something we think about. So understanding what the problems are, what the capitalist state looks like, what a theory of the state is, and of course, what these histories of revolutions are is just so so valuable to be doing at the same time, because you can't take down a thing, you can't dismantle a system unless you really understand its intricacies, both from your own experience, from the experience of those communities you're involved with, especially the most marginalized and oppressed who deal with these systems such as the police in more kind of dynamic ways. When you have marginalized and oppressed people, Black and Indigenous people who have to deal with the state, the capitalist state, in so many ways, that grants that sort of like richness of experience that then I think pushes a people's movement forward. What have you seen on the ground locally? Because I know we had a pretty powerful protest here in Austin, where I think 14 people were arrested blocking one of the major bridges here. I was wondering what you've seen there in kind of DC area as far as like a people's movement against Kavanaugh and against the system of oppression.
Well, I mean, the interesting thing here in D.C. is that we're in a very interesting local fight where it's like we're fighting our own city council for overturning an initiative that was, quote unquote, democratically voted on and approved by the people. But the city council is beholden to the restaurant lobby and overturned a democratically approved initiative. So people are fighting for fair wages. Tipped workers are fighting for fair wages against a massive restaurant industry that wants to keep them at $2.13 an hour as a minimum wage. And we're also fighting against our local city council to respect the vote that we do give. So, I mean, a lot of people here in this city, we're also fighting against the typical police abuse, police overreach, massive gentrification that is now closing entire blocks of Black-owned and long-time neighborhood businesses. So these are the things that people are dealing with on the ground, where people literally have said, we honestly don't have time to focus on what's going on with Brett Kavanaugh because the Supreme Court has not helped us up to this point. So there's this multi-layered kind of thing where there were lots of protests in front of the Supreme Court last week, but none of those people who protested at the Supreme Court either knew anything about what DC residents, mostly Black, mostly poor, were fighting against in our neighborhoods at the same time. And that excitement and anger and outrage didn't come down to our neighborhoods to support these fights. And that's the problem, right? I think that's the problem right there, that people believe that there are some of us who are so overwhelmed with our everyday battles with injustice and being dismissed by those in power, trying to have our voices heard, that we don't have the energy or the bandwidth to take on another issue. And then there are people who only focus on these big, major national issues and completely ignore the ongoing struggle of people who are fighting injustice every day. So DC is a very interesting place where I see that all the time. Where we're dealing with these local issues with a very democratically elected body like the city council that'll overturn and a voter approved initiative at its whim because they were paid by the restaurant lobby. But at the same time, they want people to vote for them because they claim they're fighting for statehood for DC. So, I mean, I think the thing that I want to emphasize is that none of this is easy, right? That none of this is easy. None of it is comfortable. It is all overwhelming. And we can't all be everywhere at once. And I'm not going to discount what anyone chooses to focus on, but I am going to challenge people who only focus on the big national issues. Take some time and find out what's going on in the city where you live, because I guarantee you some of those people who live around you in your city would love your enthusiasm and your anger to be joined with their everyday fight for just respect and recognition as a citizen, as a human being.
I think we got into, really what the nature of this Supreme Court is. And we talked about the nature of the struggle so much in general of, where we kind of are in terms of solidarity. Anything else you'd like to add in our last couple minutes?
One of the things we have to look at when we're talking specifically about the Supreme Court, if we're going to, be angry at this one person who's confirmed, we need to look at what's wrong with the whole system. And we need to be willing to push for change for the entire system. I mean, nobody should be appointed for life to the Supreme Court. Nobody. Just like several of the founding fathers, the so-called founding fathers or the framers of the Constitution, felt that the Constitution should be reviewed and changed every 10, 20 years or so, because nobody 300 years from now should be guided by laws that were written in 1776. So, if that made sense to them, then I don't understand why it doesn't make sense to us that we should not have any person in any leadership capacity in this so-called country making decisions for everyone in this country for their entire life as society changes around them. So making these big drastic changes really needs to be a part of our approach. And I think that people limit their outrage to one person rather than being outraged that the system is the way it is, and it always has been, and it needs to change.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've been joined by Jackie Luqman, the co-host of Luqman Nation, which covers politics and social issues from a Black American and Pan-Africanist perspective. You can hear Luqman Nation on YouTube and Facebook Thursday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern. Thank you very much, Jackie, for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and you are listening to People's Republic. People's Republic originates out of KOOP Radio in Austin, Texas, and is also broadcast on WHIV in New Orleans, and is available as a podcast on SoundCloud, iTunes, Spreaker, Stitcher, or wherever podcasts are podded. We are also on Spotify. The Kavanaugh nomination